女士们、先生们，大家下午好，欢迎出席国务院新闻办新闻发布会。
商务部发布了关于所谓产能过剩问题的中方立场文件。
Over the past 2 years, a term has been repeatedly mentioned in political circles and mainstream financial media in Europe and the United States: China's overcapacity. Public discourse on this issue began to gain momentum as early as the second half of 2023. In her State of the Union address that September, European Commission President von der Leyen expressed concern over the influx of competitively priced Chinese new energy vehicles into the European market. Subsequently, the European Union formally launched an anti-subsidy investigation into Chinese electric vehicles. In 2024, a number of high-ranking U.S. officials made public statements one after another. Treasury Secretary Yellen repeatedly emphasized the so-called risks of overcapacity in the new energy sector during public appearances and her visit to China. U.S. Trade Representative Tai and U.S. Ambassador to China Burns, among others, also spoke out, claiming that China's manufacturing capacity would disrupt the global market order. Subsequently, the joint statement from the G7 summit also included similar language, pointing the finger at China's industrial policies. Numerous mainstream Western financial media outlets, including Reuters, The Economist, Bloomberg, and CNN, have been churning out a steady stream of similar reports for an extended period, continuously reinforcing the narrative that China relies on subsidies to create excess capacity and dump goods abroad at low prices. Some political figures in Canada, Brazil, and Japan have followed suit in expressing their concerns. Over the next 2 years, public opinion continued to intensify, and by 2026, Western media were still constantly hyping the issue, using this rhetoric to impose various trade barriers, import restrictions, and industry investigations. To comprehensively address all external controversies and present a complete factual basis, on July 28, 2026, China's Ministry of Commerce officially released the 10,000-character official document titled, China's Position on the So-Called Excess Capacity Issue. Published simultaneously in both Chinese and English, the document systematically explained a series of contentious topics, including production capacity, industrial subsidies, and the trade surplus, and addressed the various long-standing external concerns. In recent years, international economic and trade landscape has gone through profound shifts, with major country rivalry intensifying and global industrial and supply chains reshaping quickly. With growing concerns about their industrial competitiveness and market positions, some countries and economies have politicized economic and trade issues. Hyping the so-called excess capacity of China, they accuse the country of flooding the world market with Chinese capacity and have used this as an excuse to ramp up restrictions on China, stoking up protectionism. Providing strong dynamism for world economic growth. Economic globalization is an unstoppable and overwhelming historical trend that promotes the flow of goods and capital, progress of science and technology and civilization, and exchanges among nations. As an important dimension to economic globalization, industrial cooperation is a key pathway to continuous global economic recovery and common development shared by all. China believes that, in the interest of ensuring the security and stability of global production and supply chains, and the healthy and orderly development of industrial cooperation, it is imperative to clarify related facts. First, global capacity and the so-called excess capacity should be viewed in a rounded and objective manner. The evolving global capacity landscape is the result of international industrial labor division and cooperation. Since the first industrial revolution, continuously improving productivity and deepening economic globalization have accelerated the flow of various factors of production worldwide. As global centers of production and demand shift among countries and regions, industrial capacity also moves from country to country and region to region, which changes the shares of major economies in global industrial output. In 1880, the UK's share in global industrial output peaked at 22.9%. Around the First World War, the U.S. succeeded the UK as the world's industrial centre, accounting for as much as 44.7% of the global industrial output in 1953. Gradual shift in the global industrial landscape after the Second World War from a single centre to multiple centres. As economic globalization gathers pace, international division of labor keeps deepening with several waves of global industrial transfer, first from the US to Europe, then from the US and Europe to Japan, and on to East Asia and China, as well as the current movement of some industries from China to Southeast Asia and other regions, which has formed 3 regional manufacturing centers in North America, Europe and East Asia, with their manufacturing value added respectively accounting for 17%, 17% and 38% of the global total. It is by actively integrating into economic globalization and taking part in international labor division that China has become the workshop of the world and a key component of the global manufacturing network. Given the history of the evolving global capacity landscape, the phenomenon of excess capacity in global economic development should be viewed objectively. Excess capacity is a dynamic phenomenon in the market economy. Capacity supply and demand in the world economy goes through the dynamic cycle of balance, imbalance, rebalance, without lasting capacity balance. Whether there is surplus capacity depends on supply and demand with dynamic adjustments in the life cycle of the industry. Supply-demand balance is relative, while imbalance is universal. In the age of globalization, changes in international capacity are interlinked with shifts in global supply and demand. In the course of technological revolution, emerging capacity creates new supply while old capacity becomes redundant, which leads to temporary and structural supply-demand imbalance. With adjustments of the market mechanism, supply and demand will converge towards a new equilibrium. Given varying perspectives on the concept of excess capacity, a global consensus has yet to be reached. Excess capacity remains a subject of debate across various sectors in the absence of an official definition by major international organizations. There is no definition of excess capacity or provisions on excess capacity in the World Trade Organization agreements. According to the International Monetary Fund, excess capacity is a complex concept which should be approached from the perspective of macroeconomic scenarios. Economists mostly explain excess capacity from both macro and micro perspectives. At the macro level, excess capacity is a phenomenon where the production capacity of the whole industry substantially surpasses the total effective market demand. At the micro level, excess capacity refers to a situation where firms' actual output falls short of the optimal level due to monopolistic competition. In reality, economies are no strangers to the state of excess capacity, over effective demand driven by fluctuations in economic cycles. The criteria and angles for determining whether excess capacity exists vary greatly across countries and sectors. Some economies attempt to impose on others various criteria they have invented for defining the so-called excess capacity in a simplistic, mechanical or blanket fashion to serve their specific geopolitical and protectionist ends. These so-called concepts and criteria do not hold water, as they are inconsistent with the laws of development and the actual conditions of countries. So, the measurement of excess capacity in different economies and industries should take into account their respective development stages and levels. Capacity utilization rate, an indicator often used to measure excess capacity, should be viewed differently in light of each country's actual conditions. In economics, capacity utilization rate is the ratio of actual output to potential output. There are no globally accepted criteria for determining the reasonable range of capacity utilization, as it differs across economies. Data of relevant institutions indicate that the median capacity utilization rate for advanced and fast-growing economies mostly falls in the 75 to 80% range, whereas that for less developed countries usually stands between 50% and 64%. It is the constraints of infrastructure, capital and other factors that prevent less developed countries from bringing their capacity into full play. Capacity utilization rate varies substantially across sectors. According to the latest available data on capacity utilization rates published by the 27 EU member states, 169 out of its 725 industries reported rates below 70%. Capacity utilization in some traditional industries is significantly below the average. For example, in some countries, capacity utilization in beverages and furniture stands at around 65%, while in sectors like rubber, chemicals, and plastics, it is only 40% to 50%. The latest Federal Reserve data show a 75.7% capacity utilization rate for U.S. manufacturing, but with considerable variation across sectors. The capacity utilization rate ranges from 83.2% in computer and peripheral equipment to below 70% in textiles, leather, automobiles and parts, primary metal products, furniture and related products, and communications equipment. Economic practices of various countries have shown that capacity utilization rate, although a reasonably objective indicator of the use of production capacity, is not a one-size-fits-all measure for determining whether excess capacity exists in different economies or sectors. To fully understand excess capacity, it is also necessary to objectively analyze its relationship with industrial subsidies, trade surplus, economic imbalances, and market competition. First, the relationship between industrial subsidies and excess capacity. There is no necessary connection between industrial subsidies and excess capacity. Sound industrial subsidy policies help correct market failures, advance technology innovation, protect environment, reduce poverty, and promote balanced development, rather than cause the so-called excess capacity. Many countries introduce tailored industrial policies in light of their national conditions and development needs. For example, R&D subsidies for emerging industries and risk management subsidies for the agricultural sector are legitimate industrial and trade policy tools for WTO members. Several UNCTAD reports point to the rapid increase in industrial policies worldwide over the past 5 years. Providing R&D subsidies, tax incentives and low-interest loans for emerging industries has become a widely accepted international practice. WTO members generally pursue subsidies that are fair, universal, and transparent. Major countries should set an example in ensuring their subsidies conform to WTO rules. Subsidies are not a problem, but they should be applied in a rational way, in accordance with the WTO principles of openness, fairness, and compliance. Given the significant major countries, as pacesetters of global industrial development, should take the lead in opposing the abuse of subsidies and discriminatory subsidy policies? The U.S. Inflation Reduction Act, which plans to provide a total of $750 billion in various subsidies from 2022 to 2031, requires that electric vehicles eligible for these subsidies shall be produced and sold in the U.S. or North America, effectively excluding other WTO members. The U.S. provides far more industrial subsidies for artificial intelligence than any other country. According to available statistics, the European Commission is set to provide €1.44 trillion in various subsidies between 2021 and 2030. The EU Industrial Accelerator Act links local content to fiscal support through the EU origin requirement. It is imperative that all countries make the pie of global development bigger and introduce subsidies and other industrial policies in a rational and compliant manner, rather than use them as a tool to constrain the development of others. China stands ready to engage in discussions on the subsidy policy with all sides under the WTO framework to jointly bring relevant practices into compliance. China always strictly observes WTO rules and strives to build and improve a system of subsidies in accordance with international practice. For years, China has constantly regulated and improved relevant policies to ensure that its subsidies are compliant, science-based, and transparent. It has also reviewed and standardized some unsound local practices and established a unified administration system for local government subsidies based on negative lists. The government of China has earnestly and comprehensively fulfilled its commitments on transparency in a timely manner. The latest notification submitted in June 2025 by the Government of China on central and sub-central policies on subsidies from 2023 to 2024 covered the entire country. China's subsidies apply equally to all types of market entities and mainly go to scientific R&D, initiatives on industrial application of technology, and market consumption, among other areas. China uses market-based and indirect guidance more often, such as public services, technical standards and skills training, to support priority areas like technological R&D and innovation, development of SMEs, and green and energy-efficient development. For example, the Consumer Goods Trade-in Program treats domestic and foreign invested companies equally. Both the trade-in policies for automobiles and household appliances and the subsidies for buying new digital and smart products provide equal treatment. Foreign invested companies actively participating in them have benefited equally.